everybody. We are so excited to have you join us today, especially because I wouldn't call him a special guest. I mean, he is my brother from another mother, Dr. Evan Gwilliam, and no stranger to this webinar series. But just in case this is your first time joining us and you're not familiar with Dr. G, as many call him, he is the clinical director for PDC. He's got a passion, which is a gross understatement, for documentation and coding. He has taken every course and certification that he can find to ensure that he has the information you need to succeed in your practice. He has a knack for making seemingly tedious material easy to digest and fun to learn. I'll give him that. And he really does help you as the doctor or as a team member to be able to document, code, and bill more correctly, more confidently, and more efficiently, which is why we keep bringing him back. It's not just because, again, he's my brother from another mother. Thank you so much for being here today, Evan.
Thanks, Christy. It's a pleasure. I just want to throw in I'm an all-around nice guy, too. Let's put that on my...
He is an all-around nice guy. I love how he noticed how he didn't say, thank you for inviting me. I was expecting to be like, I just show up when you tell me to.
I go where I'm supposed to go. We both do.
Yes, we do. We'll take it away.
All right, great. So what we're talking about today is auditing yourself the way that Medicare would. So this is actually a brand new presentation, and my hope is that you find it helpful. I'll be honest, I was working on some of the information for these slides just a few hours ago. So you'll have to let me know if this is the most useful, the way it's been set up. I am a chiropractor, but I'm also a certified coder and certified auditor, as Christy mentioned, and a bunch of other things. And as a clinical director for PDC, I work with clients all day long with our software to help them use it in a way that gives them the best records, so they'll stand up to scrutiny and to audits. And I also do work with attorneys from time to time where we review records or we're helping form a rebuttal to someone who's reviewing them and says that they're bad or there's problems and so on. So my intention with you today is to give you tools that you can use to figure out how to do your own audit before someone else does it. We don't want someone to come in and look at your records and look at your billing and say, this is all messed up. We want $20,000 or $80,000 back. I want to prevent that. I want to get this so that you can figure out how to do it before you have to spend money on it, basically, or give money back. So I'm going to give you some tools here, some of which I'm going to show you are these files and stuff, and I'm happy to send them to you after we're done. You can email me and ask for them. My email address is at the bottom of this slide. Just shoot me an email and say, hey, that presentation you did about Medicare audits, can you send me, I'm going to send you, I have some sample notes that we're going to use. We're going to audit them together. And I also have some Medicare auditing tools, a Medicare auditing tool, and I'll send those over to you. However, I just want to throw out a little disclaimer here. I will have an ulterior motive. I'll always throw in, when I send you stuff, I'll say, hey, by the way, do you want to come check out PDC? Because I would love for you to come look at our software, do a demo, see if it might work in your office and make your office work better. It's a great system. I love it. I'd love to show it to you or get someone to do a demo for you. And that's going to always be my background motive, right? I'll send you whatever you like. I'll help you. I'll answer all your questions. But P.S., take a look at our software. All right. So just be expecting that. Little disclaimer. Another disclaimer here is this stuff is all my opinion, and I am just sharing with you my observations and what I've gathered. So take that into account. Talk to an attorney if you're having real issues. If you really want your attorney to have me help them, they can hire me and we can do all that stuff. But just know that this is all just stuff that I've made up. All right. So here's what we're going to cover in this time we have together today. I'm going to talk to you about what Medicare is looking for. Now, some of you may be watching this and saying, wait a minute, I don't even deal with Medicare. I refuse to accept it. I'm doing something else. No problem. This is still relevant. Okay. We're going to use Medicare as the standard here. But the thing is, if it's good enough for Medicare, it's good enough for anybody. And I believe that some of the things that Medicare requires will make your personal injury notes better. It'll make your notes for Blue Cross patients better. It'll make your cash patients notes better. So even though we're discussing Medicare specifically, this is kind of general concepts that need to be in every note, regardless of who the payer is. Okay, so we're going to take a note. I've made up a sample note using PDC, and we're going to audit it, compare it to this Medicare tool. We're going to talk a little bit about maintenance care, just define it. I'm sure you've heard it talked about before. It's something that's not covered by Medicare or pretty much any other payer. and we're going to discuss maintenance care to make sure you know how to make that you haven't documented maintenance care when you meant to document corrective or active treatment. And we're going to talk briefly at the end about how you become an audit target. Mostly we're going to talk about being an outlier. Okay, so we'll discuss what that looks like and how you can be aware if you're at risk of being audited because you may be an outlier. And we'll discuss what puts you in that category. So this is what I have planned for you, what I want to cover. We're going to start with something really exciting. This is something that I pull out sometimes at night when I'm trying to put my kids to bed, when I read to them and get them, get them in the mindset of just calming down. It's the 2021 Medicare Fee-for-Service Supplemental Improper Payment Data Report. It's great fun. It's 84 pages, mostly a bunch of tables. And if you search for the word chiropractic in this report, it comes up 5 or 6 times. I just want to show you where it comes up once in one of the tables in Appendix E. Okay, so Medicare has this data about how they assume or where claims are being paid that shouldn't be. Okay, where money's being spent that shouldn't be spent. So this table is the top 20 services that, by percentage, with the most errors in terms of who gets paid the most in error by Medicare. And you'll see there, the second one from the top is our friend chiropractic. I mean, that's us, right? And it's funny, this table is different from the year before. Chiropractic was at the top. Now the one at the top is something that I don't even know what it is. Other non-Medicare fee schedule. So I want to say that chiropractic is still ranked number 1, but I'm not really sure because I don't understand what the number 1 is. So I guess we're number 2. The error rate, the improper payment rate for chiropractors, according to this study, this data set that they did, is 33.7%. So they're saying that of all the money they paid chiropractors in 2021, based on their research, 33.7% of them should not have been paid. They were paid incorrectly. And the number 1 reason for that is because of insufficient documentation. 86.8% of the time, the error is because the documentation wasn't good enough. In other words, bad documentation is a real problem for chiropractic, according to Medicare. And if I worked for Blue Cross or United Healthcare, I would look at this report and assume kind of the same thing is true for the beneficiaries that I have in my policy. So the number 1 reason for improper payments to chiropractors is insufficient documentation. 86.8% of the time, that's the reason. The next biggest reason is medical necessity, which is 8.6%. I do want to point something out here. This report is based upon an estimate that Medicare paid out $8.5 billion incorrectly. And of that, chiropractic is responsible for 0.7%, or about $176 million. So, our error rate is huge, but the total dollar amount is very small. It's 0.7% of the total amount they feel like they paid out improperly. So take that into consideration. Also note the way they did this is they went and looked at a bunch of claims. They looked at over 14,000 claims across all specialties that were billed to Medicare. And of those, 196 were chiropractic claims. And so they looked at 196 claims and they came up with these findings. They found about a third of them were bad. And they took that and extrapolated to all the money they paid out to chiros and came up with $176 million. So this is an extrapolation based on 196 claims. So you have to take that into account as you consider this. The point is, chiropractors have bad records. That's kind of the reputation we have, and that's what Medicare sees. So when it comes to your records, here's your question for you. Do you believe that they are a weakness that can be exploited? When someone, like if I came into your office and I worked for Medicare, do you feel that I would find ways to exploit your records to your detriment and, at the end of the day, have to give back money? Or if I came in and looked at your records, or a Medicare auditor or the FBI or the Office of the Inspector General, if somebody came in and said, I want to see your records, would you feel like your records are a suit of armor that protects you from liability and failed audits? Does your documentation actually make you feel safer or more exposed? So imagine that you are dressed up in your best battle armor, okay? You're out on the battlefield and your opponent is coming at you. They're on a horse, okay? And they're charging down at you and they have a lance ready to go and they're studying you. They're staring at your armor and they're looking for chinks. They're looking for a weak point in that armor. They want to see if they can find a spot where they can line up their lance as they're charging down on you and ram it into an area where there's a weak spot in your armor and inflict a mortal wound. And so, for example, if they look and go, hey, they don't sign their records in a timely manner, or their initial evaluation visits not documented very well, or they have a really bad care plan. They look for those things and they're looking for these weak points in your documentation. This is what auditors do. And if they find one, they're going to try to get back what you were paid. essentially, or get you kicked off a network or whatever the case may be. So the goal here, my goal is to help you shore up your armor, to see if there's a chink between the breastplate and the the arm band or whatever it's called, and figure out how to make sure that area is strong as well, so that when you are being charged down by your enemy, so to speak, they have trouble finding a weak spot because your armor is so solid and so good. Your records are so thorough and complete, yet they don't weigh you down and take you, forever to create. They're just thorough and good, and they do the job. So to help you figure that out, Medicare, we're gonna use Medicare. Medicare's given us pretty much what they're looking for. They published this tool several years ago, and I put the reference vertically on the left-hand side of your screen. It's MLN 1232664. Okay, you can Google that, come across this original document. It's only 3 or 4 pages long. It basically says, if you get a records request from Medicare, here's a checklist for you to know what to do. So this is what Medicare looks for in records. And we're going to use this. There's more to, this is just the initial evaluation checklist that they give us, but there's more to it. We're going to look at subsequent visits and care plans too. So let's just take a minute, and I'm going to actually go through a real record with you. I have here a record I created using PayDC, using my software. It's an initial exam, and we're going to audit this record. But to make this a little easier, I'm actually going to bring this up. There we go. So I have this in a Word document here, and I'm going to move it around, and we're just going to compare to the checklist here on the left and look in the note and audit. And that's what auditing is at the end of the day. It's here's the rules, here's what I got, let's compare the two and see if they line up. So that's what I want to do with you here, is we'll just kind of review this record. This is a sample record I made up. It's a fake patient. None of this is real information. This is a 24-visit care plan. This is the first visit. And this document only covers, I think, 4 or 5 visits. I did the first 4 or 5 visits. I made them all up. And it goes on. It's 13 pages of notes for a patient sample. Okay. So if we're going to audit this the way that a Medicare auditor would, we would simply go down the list and go, okay, is there a date of initial treatment? And sure enough, the date of service is right there, 5/2. Is there a description of the present illness? Yep, there's a description of the present illness. What the patient says, there's the complaints there. Is there a symptom that bears a direct relationship to a subluxation? And I'm looking at this, and I see that the complaint is the left shoulder and neck. And I didn't explicitly state in this record anywhere that this is directly tied to the subluxation. So I could do that better. I think this record could be a little better if I had done that. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty much a given. We could all accept that shoulder and neck complaints are often associated with subluxation. So we could easily make that jump. But I'm a fan of making the records be so explicit that nobody has to make a jump. Nobody has to guess or try to interpret. So we just work our way down. There's family history, past history. And down here we have past family social history, all labeled nicely. There's the mechanism of trauma. And up here it says, where does it say? Oh, working in the yard was the mechanism of trauma. There's quality and character of the symptoms. So we have all these details about it: sharp, stabbing, stiffness, etc. And all these extra details about onset, duration, intensity, frequency. That's all in here. All that's listed here. Aggravating and relieving factors. That's increased by working and driving, decreased by stretching and rest. So that's all satisfied there. Prior interventions. We do have a statement up here that he had similar problems a few years ago. Chiropractic helped. So all I'm doing is going through and checking off the ones that I find. And if there's something missing, like I find one that could be a little better, I might mark it as deficient and figure out how I could improve it in my record, right? So we keep going here. They're looking for contraindications. I actually don't have that stated here. I put it in a different part of my record in the care plan. So I could do a better job maybe, because a Medicare auditor, I don't want them to have to go look in other places. I did it, but I did it in a place that's harder for the auditor to find. So I might consider changing the way I've done my records and putting it in here and saying, no contraindications to chiropractic manipulation identified at this encounter. And that would be a great statement to have to satisfy that requirement there. The next thing is you have to do part, and we will look at that more closely in just a minute. And then it says you have to show that there's a subluxation at every visit, because if I don't show there's a subluxation, then I don't have any business doing an adjustment. That's kind of the way I look at it. At the end of this, they say you need to document the treatment that was given. And so if you look at the bottom of my note here, this is all my exam. I'm scrolling through here. There's my assessment. I've diagnosed the patient with subluxation. Actually, I didn't do this in the Medicare order, so I could fix that for Medicare. But in the plan, at the very bottom, I've got my treatment. And I've done, this is the treatment. And this case wasn't designed for Medicare. It's more, I've done other services here. But nonetheless, there it is. And it stated clearly what was done and how it was done and all that. So I can check off most of these. There are a few that I feel like I could do a little better, right? And that's how you audit. That's kind of the basics of auditing, is just comparing to the checklist. I have a more thorough tool that I use for my audit clients, where I actually have a computerized spreadsheet type thing where if I identify a deficiency, I can pull up a suggestion list of suggested comments on how to improve. This is more of the tool that you guys can get for free and use it yourself. Just look up the tool online. It's, again, here, let me go back to it here. It's on the left. You can just Google that, look up the job aid for chiropractic. The document's been around for a while, but they just updated it in March this year. So it's pretty current. In that document, they also say what a treatment plan needs to include, and they tell us what you should include for subsequent visits. So let's do a quick audit of a treatment plan as well as a subsequent visit so you can see what we would need to look for. So here we go, treatment plan. I've created a treatment plan in my software, and this is just a snippet of it. I'm actually going to pull over the full thing here so I can show you. There we go. I've got it. Here's a PDF. So here's a care plan for this fake patient. And the question is, Medicare really only outlines 3 criteria. I like, when I talk about care plans, I get much more detailed, and I have a lot more stuff I think should be in there. But for Medicare auditor, they're looking for 3 things. Is there a frequency and duration of visits? Well, if you look at the care plan I pulled together for this patient, it basically goes through kind of an outline of clinically what's going on. Here's the patient's problems. Here are the complicating factors. I've listed some diagnostic tests with rationale. I've also put in some long-term goals. And then at the bottom, I've said, but the details are this. This care plan has 3 stages, and I called them acute, rehabilitative, and strengthening. And then I've outlined what happens in each stage of care. So in the first stage, I'm going to do 9940, and I'm going to do it 3 times a week for 4 weeks. So this is where I answer the question right here, frequency and duration of visits, right? That's just for the first stage. In the next stage of care, which I call rehab, I'm going to continue to do CMT services, and I expect them to be twice a week for 4 more weeks. So I've got this clearly satisfied here. I check the box and I move on to the next one, which is treatment goals. Well, treatment goals were up here. There's my long-term goals. And I have these 2 functionally based goals right here with very specific details about what's wrong with the patient's function and how it's been lost and how to improve that function or what we hope to gain. Okay. So I've got that one satisfied. And then it has objective measures to evaluate treatment effectiveness. I'm going to go back down to the specific treatments. If I'm going to do this treatment, how are we going to measure it? Well, it's going to improve range of motion. During the first stage, it's going to improve at 50%. During the second stage, we hope the range of motion will improve by 75%. And in the final stage of care, we hope to get it to 100%. So I've got very clear ways to objectively measure treatment effectiveness. I got more in here, but that just shows you I can check off all 3 of these in this care plan document. Okay. I don't believe the care plan needs to be its own separate document necessarily, but it can be. And it's a nice thing to provide to the patient or an attorney or another provider. The way that I like to do it is like this, where I bring back in my initial visit note. So what we're looking at here is the initial exam, visit 1 of 24. And if we scroll down to the bottom of this first visit note, in the plan section, I've inserted the care plan here. I've mentioned it. It's got each stage of care and all the details. And I like to do that in the first visit note because I think it lays out the foundation for everything that's going to follow. But in my subsequent notes, I don't restate the care plan. I think it's great to have it at the initial encounter, put it right in there, drop it in, or have it as a separate document if you want. But here it is. There's my long, thorough plan. I was able to generate this really quickly and easily with software, but you can do it any way you want as long as you're consistent, right? So let's move that out of the way. And that's the treatment plan requirement. So let's do the next thing we get from the Medicare self-audit job aid is subsequent visits. Here's their criteria for what they're looking for in a subsequent visit for the daily visits that follow. So let's take a look. Here's a snippet of one, but I'm going to actually bring the bigger version back over here so I can scroll through it. This is visit number 2 of 24. And let me go down. Let's just, to make it interesting, let's go to visit number 3 of 24. Now, this is a daily note. It's only about a page and a half long. Okay. Unlike my initial note, which was like 4 pages because I had the care plan in there and all that extra detail. So the subsequent visit should have the history, review of the chief complaint. Here it is, primary complaint. Here's a review of it right there. Changes since the last visit. This is a really important point. I've made the changes bolded here. So it's really easy to see what's changed because I bolded them. So it's super easy for an auditor to find what they're looking for in these records because I bolded them to make it easy to spot. And then system review if relevant, which wasn't in this case. And then, the next thing that we're looking for in subsequent visits is part. Have we satisfied part? Well, part is pain, asymmetry, range of motion, and tissue or tone change. And we'll look at those in more detail in a second. But here's asymmetry. And here's the asymmetry we found. And then here's the ones that changed in bold. And then here's some T for tenderness. So I've gotten a couple of those elements. There's more in here, but you can see there's tenderness right here. And so I've satisfied those 2. I've satisfied part. Evaluation of treatment effectiveness. So we go down here to the assessment, and we have a statement about treatment effectiveness. It says, yeah, we were trying to accomplish this goal, and it looks like we've progressed 10%. The patient states they were able to sleep a little longer, and one of the goals was to get them to sleep as part of their improvement of function. So we've satisfied this one here that says evaluation of treatment effectiveness. It's right there. And then documentation of the presence of subluxations. Again, they're mentioned up here as diagnosis codes and in the objective findings to support them. Here, there's one of the diagnoses. And then what treatment was given today? Well, here it is. I did 3 different treatments today, and here they are as bullet points. Again, for Medicare, I'm only getting reimbursed for this first one, but I've got all those criteria satisfied now, right? I've taken a note, I've reviewed it, and it has all the criteria I was looking for based on this job aid that Medicare gave us, okay? They also added details about subluxations and how to document for them, and they give us 2 methods. One is through imaging. That's the first half of this. And the second half is, or you can document the PART evaluation, P-A-R-T, listed here, and you can satisfy the criteria Medicare sets aside for that. I don't want to dive deeply into that. I have some other stuff I want to show you. I have different presentations where we kind of take a deeper dive into what each of these mean. But let me tell you what they mean to me. For me, since this is an evaluation, it's a physical exam, then I think quite easily you can just drop it into your SOAP note in the objective section. Medicare only requires us to do 2 of these 4 elements, and one of them has to be the A or R, which is asymmetry or range of motion. So to do PART, I suggest that you try to document 2 of these elements, one of which should be A or R, right in the objective section. I have some colleagues I've heard say, no, pain is what the patient reports, so it's really subjective. But to me, it fits better as an objective finding because Medicare calls it part of their evaluation. And so I think of it more as tenderness findings, not so much patient reporting of symptoms. However, an argument can be made either way. So that's kind of the way it would fit into a nice clean note. As an auditor, if you adjust a patient, here's what I'm looking for. And I don't care if it's Medicare or anybody else. First, did you document PART in the objective findings? Did you show there was a subluxation? You found evidence of one. If so, then you can diagnose the patient with an M990 diagnosis, which is segmental dysfunction. And if you diagnose them with segmental dysfunction, I think you can justify providing a CMT, 98940, 98941, and that sort of thing. So this is a simple way for you to audit yourself. If you did an adjustment, did you have an M990 diagnosis? Did you support it with PART? That's great. There are other ways perhaps you might feel you can justify that a patient needs to be adjusted, or other diagnoses you think can support 98940, 1 and 2. But I think this is very clean and very, very obvious and easy to defend, especially to a Medicare auditor, but to anybody else. So that's kind of my little simple way to audit if a patient needed to be adjusted. Did you have that diagnosis? Could you support it with your findings? That's kind of the simple way to look at that. There may be other codes that support it, but I think this way is very clean and easy to support. There was one other thing in this job aid from Medicare, and it was some general guidelines. And this is, I know, a lot of words on your slide, and I hope it's not too overwhelming. But again, you can go and you can download the tool and get this for yourself and check. You just put this side by side with the chart that you're auditing and check off the boxes. So in this case, I'm not going to kind of hit all of these. I'm just going to mention a few of them. But it talks about the AT modifier and how you need to do corrective treatment, not maintenance. Medicare is very clear they won't pay for maintenance, and most private payers are the same way. You have to do what's called corrective. And the way that they want you to identify that is with the AT modifier, but they're saying do not put the AT modifier on it when it's not corrective. It's when it's maintenance, okay? And just because you put the AT modifier on there doesn't make it medically necessary. That's not how you justify medical necessity, not with the modifier. The modifier is there to support that your notes are medically necessary and have all that. And there's other tips and things in here. Rather than dive into these, I'm just going to let you know there's other things you have to do. But let's look a little bit deeper at about medical necessity, because it's an important concept no matter who you're trying to get paid by. According to Medicare, they have defined medical necessity as services or items that are reasonable and necessary for the diagnosis or treatment of illness or injury, or to improve the functioning of a malformed body member. And I underlined the key word here, which is function. Here's my gist of if care is medically necessary. If you show the patient lost function and your care improves function, you're medically necessary. Okay, so Medicare in their guidelines elaborates on this for us, and they talk about how they will only cover as long as there's a reasonable expectation that continued treatment will result in some improvement. So they also say that continued repetitive treatment without a clearly defined endpoint is maintenance. So I get these questions a lot where it's like, well, okay, I get maintenance therapy and stuff, but what about this patient who just shows up once in a while, every month or two for a couple of visits? I could argue that there's no clear endpoint. There's no defined clinical endpoint. Therefore, it's not medically necessary and it's maintenance care. But you could argue, well, there's an endpoint. They come in after 2 months and I see them 3 times and 3 times I release them. Okay, well, then you could argue that. It's definitely a gray area. You need to prove somehow in your records, if you want Medicare to pay for it, that there's an expectation that treatment's going to result in some sort of improvement, and that there's an endpoint to that improvement. And when they reach that endpoint, care is completed. That's what the payers are looking for. Okay, and if you can't define that, then accept that the patient should pay out of pocket for it. If you can, then go ahead and bill for it. Then it's medically necessary. Medicare further defines that maintenance is considered services that are there to prevent disease, promote health, prolong and enhance quality of life, or even prevent deterioration of a chronic condition, okay, or maintain it. That's supportive care. And in the old days, we used to be able to get away with saying supportive care was reimbursable, but generally it's not, which is unfortunate. I think it should be. I like it. I think it's good for patients, but it's just not something that they'll pay for. If you don't believe that further clinical improvement can reasonably be expected, then it's generally not reimbursable. Okay, so that's how Medicare defines it. So that was just kind of a drink from the water hose about some heavy, audit principles and things that we're looking for in notes. There's certainly much more we could get into if you had more time, but I want to talk about a different concept with the remaining time we have, and it's more about audit risk. It's about what makes you a target for an audit and how you can identify if you're someone who needs to prepare for an audit because you are considered higher risk or you're expected to be audited. Okay, so here's the deal. Statistics, all right? Some of you may have had a statistics class back in college. I did Statistics 101 as a sophomore or maybe a junior in my undergrad, right? And one of the things we learned about was the bell curve, okay? And the bell curve is a way to organize data and figure out what's considered outliers, what's normal, quote unquote, and what's abnormal. So this is a sample bell curve where you see in the middle where it says same as others, that's one standard deviation away from the mean. The mean is the average, and standard deviation is a mathematical concept that I don't know if I can explain because I don't know that I understand it at the moment. But the point is, if you're falling in that group, your 68% of the data set is going to be in that same as others. Most are going to be close to the mean, close to the average. If we go out 2 standard deviations from the mean, it says probably more or less than others. Then we are now at 96% of all the data in this set is going to fall into this group. So if we look at a bunch of data, 96% is going to be within 2 standard deviations of the average or mean. And 3 standard deviations takes us out to 99.6%, I think it is. If you do something way more than everyone else or way less. So let me give you an example. I don't know if you knew this, but the average chiro bills Medicare about $18,000 a year on average. If you take all the money that Medicare got billed for by chiros and how many chiros there were $18,000 on average billed by chiro. So if you bill $5,000 to Medicare every year, you're way below average. You're probably 2 standard deviations or 3 away to the left-hand side of this bell curve. You're way below normal because you only bill a couple $1,000 maybe a year. The average chiro bill is 18. So if you bill 17 or 19 or 25 or so, you're probably in the middle of this bell curve. You're right in the center where the same as others. Most doctors bill around 18 grand, give or take a certain amount. If you bill Medicare $100,000 a year, because you see a ton of Medicare patients, you're going to be way to the right of this bell curve, and you're going to be someone who bills far more than everybody else. And that's going to make you more likely to be an audit target. Also, Medicare, most chiropractors, if they see a Medicare patient, they bill Medicare an average of 7 to 9 times. You'll see where I got those numbers from in just a minute. So if you bill Medicare for a patient more than, say, 9 times, like you bill them 80 times for one patient, that's an outlier. If you bill them 1 or 2 times, that's also an outlier. But on average, we're looking at 7 to 9 is what Medicare normally sees for what chiropractors bill for the number of visits in a year for one beneficiary. Okay, so let me show you with you a few more statistics, and then we'll apply all this. All right. This is a pie chart that I got from some data from my friends with Infinity, which is a clearinghouse that does a lot of work with chiropractic. They work exclusively with, or not exclusively, but they work with our software as well. And so I got some data from them about how often chiropractors build these different 3 codes. And it looks like 98942 is billed very rarely. This is not Medicare specific. This is just in general for chiropractors. 98942 is not billed very often. If you bill it more than, say, 3%, then you're an outlier. You're odd, and you stand out, and you're more likely to get audited if you bill 98942 more than everybody else. 98940 is billed less than 98941, but 98941 seems to be the most common code billed by chiropractors. So if you bill 98941 80% of the time, you're an outlier. If you bill 98940 10% of the time, or 80% of the time, whatever, you're an outlier. I expect you to see 98940 about 40% of the time, even though this chart shows 30. I expect it to be closer to 40, and 98941 would be 50 to maybe 60%. And then 98942 would be 3% or less. That's the norm. If you're outside that norm, you are more likely to be audited. And that is not to say that you can't do that. Go ahead and bill however you bill, whatever you feel is clinically important to your patients, whatever they really need, do that. But understand that if you're outside the norm, you're more likely to be targeted. And I can prove it with a couple of things. First, I have 2 reports I want to share with you. One is from Blue Cross Blue Shield. This is with a client of mine who got this report from Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they said, look, we looked at all the claims you submitted to us for a year. And we found that you're the red bar here. And the other blue bars are 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations from the mean. So what they're saying is on the bar that's on the far right here, that's 68% of the chiropractors in their network billed adjustments 500 times in that year. You know, not 500 different patients, but 500 total claims were submitted to Blue Cross on average by chiropractors. And if you move to the next one here, which is 2 standard deviations from the mean, this is 96% of the chiros billed 900 times. And 3 standard deviations is 99.6% of the times was about 1,300. And then this chiropractor billed Blue Cross about 1,700 times or 1,800 times. And so they were more than 3 standard deviations from the mean. They did something way different than average. So that made them an outlier. And if you know the data for your network, or you know what the normals are, this one was actually Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois from 2020 to 2021. You know, if you can pull the data, and you know, if you were way outside the norm, you would have gotten this letter just like this guy did, this doctor did. But that's one way you stand out, and you're more likely to be audited. And this guy got this letter, and it said, look, here's where you stand. We're not auditing you right now, but we just might. Okay. And so be aware that that's what could happen with you. You just might be audited if you stand out. So I want to talk about one more thing with you, and we're going to do a little deeper dive into this. This is a comparative billing report from Medicare. Some of you probably have one of these. You got them at the beginning of this year. A whole bunch of them went out. I want to look at one a little more closely with you because I want you to understand what makes someone a bigger risk. Okay, so let's make this bigger, actually. Let me enlarge this for you. There we go. So this is a comparative billing report for a real doctor who sent it to me, shared it with me, January of 2022. Medicare sends these out. And what happens is, I believe what happens is they get a bigger budget and they send out more of these. And then they have a smaller budget and they run out of money to do these reports. So they don't do them for a while. And so we got a whole slew of these at the beginning of this year. And people were kind of freaking out, and I reached out to me and said, what should I do about this? So let me show you what this one says and why it puts this office a little bit at risk. And they need to understand they may be audited in the future. A comparative billing report is not an audit request or a record request. It's just a service provided by CMS to say, hey, you look a little odd and we're watching you. And so this letter kind of explains what the purpose of it is and what it does. But rather than read it all to you, let's go down to the important stuff. They said, look, we looked at that report, that 2021 improper payment data report, and we found that chiropractors were improperly paid 33.7% of the time, which represents $176 million that we gave to chiropractors that we shouldn't have in 2021. And that the most common reason for the improper payment is insufficient documentation. Okay, 86% of the time, chiropractors are paid improperly because of insufficient documentation. So this is just more background information where they're explaining, what they were looking at and which codes they were reviewing. And they said, look, you're going to get one of these reports if you meet this criteria. Okay, you are higher than others compared to the national percentages in any of the metrics. And there's 3 of them we're going to look at. You have at least 60 beneficiaries. So they don't care so much about chiropractors who only see 15 or 20 Medicare beneficiaries. They're more interested in the ones that see at least 60. Okay. And they want you to have billed Medicare at least 20 grand. If you build less than 20 grand, they're not as interested in you. So these are the things that made this particular chiropractor get a report, was that they met this criteria. Okay. So a little above average compared to other chiropractors. Nothing wrong here. The doctor hasn't done anything wrong, but this just makes them stand out. So we go a little further into the report, and these are the numbers. This clinic billed Medicare $74,000, and they billed them 2,200 times, and they have 224 beneficiaries in this office. Okay, so those are the three things, the criteria for this office. Now, these are the things they measured. Let me just jump down to them and show you what we get here. By the way, there are 42,813 chiropractors who billed Medicare last year, and they billed for $768 million. Okay, total 42,000 doctors. And that's how I came up with the number that the average chiropractor bills $18,000, because it's 768 million divided by 42,000. It's 18 grand. So the average chiro gets or bills Medicare for 18 grand. Now, Medicare, for this report, for this office, they looked at the average allowed services per beneficiary. And it looks like of the 224 beneficiaries this clinic saw, they saw them an average of 10 times. So the average Medicare beneficiary went into this office 10 times. Some people only went twice, others went in 20, but the average was 10. And they said in your state, the average is 7 and the national average is 9. So you were higher than average. So they're telling this office, look, you saw your patients a little bit more than most chiropractors. The average is 9 nationwide, and you saw them 10 and 7 in your state. And then they went on to say, how'd you do for 98942? Well, the average is 3.5%, or I think my other data was under 3%, but you can see 98942 is rare, and you didn't do it at all. This office didn't bill 98942 ever. So they're not identified as an outlier for that one. I mean, actually, they are an outlier because they expect them, the average is 3% or 4 or up to 5% nationwide, but they did it not at all. So they're kind of like, well, did you do this service? Are you just not billing for it? Are you not confident? Are you hiding other things? And then they also, this is interesting, how many of their claims do they submit with the modifier AT? So for those of you who don't know, Medicare requires that chiropractors include an AT modifier when they bill for adjustments, and that tells them that it's active treatment or that it's medically necessary and not maintenance care. And these guys, every single claim they sent in had the AT on it, so 100% of the time it was used, and they're saying that meant that the office felt that every service was medically necessary that they submitted to Medicare. Now, is that a problem? Not necessarily, because the only way you can submit a claim to Medicare without the AT is if the patient fills out the ABN and chooses option 1, which allows you to put on the GA modifier instead, and you're expecting a denial anyway. And so these patients, if they had wellness patients, they chose option 2, and they had no reason to send in the claims. I hope you guys followed that. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, shoot me an email. I'll explain. I'll send you a link to a different webinar that elaborates on this concept. The point is, they said that these guys always bill with AT. They expect to see some claims without it, but it's kind of weird because they said the national percentages were 100 as well, and I don't quite understand what they meant there. So the takeaway I have for you is this. The CBR report, Medicare looks at 3 items. This must be the 3 things that they care the most about. If you're using the AT modifier too much, or you shouldn't, if you're billing 98942, and if you see patients more visits than average. Those are 3 things that make you higher risk, okay, if you do more than average. The average is 9. The average for 98942 is less than 5%. And the AT modifier, I don't understand their data here. I don't quite get why they said 100% nationwide. I expect it to be like, 90% of the time nationwide, and then 10% of the claims come in with a GA modifier instead because they signed the ABN and they wanted it sent. So the point is, use the AT properly and only bill for care that's medically necessary, not maintenance care. Don't bill for 98942 unless you can support it properly, but don't never bill for it. There should be times when it does work. And, see your patients as much as you need. But if you see more than 9 times, odds are good that you are an outlier and you're more likely to be scrutinized. So be prepared to support what you've done and make sure you met the criteria for it. Okay. So that's what we learned from this CBR report. I hope that made sense to you guys. It was helpful. That's what puts you at risk, is if you are different from your peers. Okay. So this is what I wanted to share with you today in this How to Audit Yourself. I wanted you to understand what Medicare is looking for. So I provided you with that job aid that Medicare released and updated in March of 2022. We looked at a sample note and I compared it to the Medicare job aid so you could see how I might audit one and see what's missing. I want you to understand what maintenance care is and what it isn't, and how to avoid billing for it and understand when you should not get reimbursed for it. And I wanted you to understand that statistically, if you're an outlier, that's what puts you at risk. And it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you need to support what you're doing. So those are things I wanted to share with you. I am happy to provide you with a copy of the notes that I used for this audit. If you want to see what good notes look like, they're not perfect, but they're pretty good, and they'll stand up to a good audit. And I will happily send you that job aid if you don't want to try to find it yourself. And I'll send it over. But I'm disclaimer here. I'm also going to say, by the way, do you want to look at our great EHR software? Because that's what I used to create these notes. And I think it's a great system, and it can help you with all this and do a lot of the heavy lifting. We built in a lot of the guidelines, so it'll check things for you and make sure that they're right. And I would love for you to demo PayDC as a software to use in your office. You can just request that directly by emailing me. But when I send you those documents, I'll ask you to do that. So that's what I had to share with you today. Christy, I'm going to bring you back on, and we'll see if there's anything else we need to discuss.
Okay, let's see. Question: what is a malformed body member?
Well, I don't know if that's an appropriate topic for this. No, that in Medicare's definition, it's just something that has a problem. And so that definition wasn't specific to chiropractic. It was a general definition of what medical necessity is according to Medicare for everything. And so as a chiropractor, I would say a malformed body member would be a subluxation, a part of the body that's not working the way it's supposed to, something you need to fix, a problem you identified, and you put together a care plan to fix it. And that's why Medicare is on the hook for paying for that. Okay.
That's the only question I have so far. Let's see. I have so many questions about that report.
Want to talk about it?
I think if the national average is 9, that means that there are some states who have more than 9 visits. So technically, you could be within the average of your state, but still be above the national average.
Right. So see in the report, they did both. They compared to both. This clinic, I forget where this clinic is. I think they might have been in the New England area. I don't remember. But this clinic, they saw the patient 10 times. In their state, the average is even lower. It's 6.89, so about 7 times. So they said in your state, you're higher than average, but also nationally, the average is 9, so they're higher than that as well. So those of you who got these reports, your report should probably still have 9 here, but it will have a different number here because, and you, of course, your numbers go over here. So every state's different. And I think that like Florida, for example, with more retirees might have higher average numbers, you know. Other places where there's fewer Medicare beneficiaries, maybe they don't get seen as much.
Let's see. Is there a way to figure out Florida's stats without singling themselves out?
Yes, I think well, no, you know what? I have to think about that. That report that I showed you earlier. No, it's not going to get that specific. This is where that appendix was. I showed you at the beginning of my presentation, and it has chiropractic listed here, but it's not going to get that dialed in. It has state stuff, but it's not specific to chiro. So I don't know. I'm going to have to, I don't know where to find that data. I bet it's out there for free somewhere though. So hit me up later and I will help you find it. I think we could probably do that somewhere at cms.gov. Everything is there somewhere. I bet we can find it. I just don't know where off the top of my head.
So if you're a practice who bills Medicare and you have not received a CBR report, could you request one?
Can you request? I'm not sure. Medicare looks at these 3 criteria, right? And remember I showed you in this report, this is why you get a CBR if you're one of these 3 things or all of these things or a combination of them. And so I don't know.
I would think that at least, somebody said, would you want to request a CBR report? I would think no, because it would mean that you have issues, like potential issues. It doesn't mean that there's necessarily an issue because this doctor's documentation could absolutely support the billing. It just says you're an outlier, which is how they determine. I mean, that's basically the algorithm that's running in the background that makes them look a little closer and check the documentation.
That's right. And so if you're an outlier, I'm not saying be average. I'm saying have great records, improve medical necessity, and recognize that if you are an outlier, you're going to more likely to get targeted. But don't, give your patients less care because you're trying to fit this norm here. Give them as much care as you believe is clinically necessary, and then support it and back it up. And it's okay to be atypical.
I'm just curious what would you hope to find out from the CBR report that other than what is the average in your state? Because in most EHR software, a lot of this information you can pull.
Yeah, you can pull your data from your billing stuff and figure out how many visits you have for your patients, how much you billed to Medicare. Again, the average chiropractor bills $18,000 according to their data here. So according to these numbers right here. So, you can kind of know where you stand. We just don't know what your state average is, but nationwide it's 9 according to this report. So it gives you a ballpark.
It does. I was going to say the only thing that I see on this report that is definitely a concern is the fact that they only bill 4.1 and 4.2. I mean, not 4.1 and 4.2, but 4.0 and 4.1 and not 4.2.
Yeah. And it's probably because they were told it's too tricky. 9942 requires you to have clear documentation to support 5 regions. And so it is a little harder to support, but it's not as big a risk as if you build it too much. Billing it too little, they're going to target the ones who build it too much first. But at the same time, you're probably undercharging. You probably could collect a little more, because I bet once in a while you see patients where you can clearly justify 5 regions, and you should do it when you can and get paid a little more, because it happens at least 5% of the time, according to the national average. So you might be leaving money on the table.
This is a great question. So if the 90% of the reason for an audit or is insufficient documentation are most doctors submitting charts every time they bill, how would Medicare know the documentation was insufficient? Because they do a records request.
Yeah, well, so this report that I got that data from, where they came up with that number of 86.8%, is based on 196 claims. So for those 196 claims they used for the report, they did get their documentation. And then they looked at those 196, they came up with this number that 86% of them have bad documentation of the 33% that were not payable. And then they took that and extrapolated it to mean all chiropractors, they assume, must fit this average based on the 196 they looked at in their data set.
Which seems like a crazy way for them to come up with these percentages, but that's how all payers come up with their percentages.
They do a sample and extrapolate.
Right, extrapolate. So when you see, like, there was one doctor in California who got hit with $700,000 in fines and penalties from Medicare because his office never responded to a single records request. So he had a 100% error rate. So that would be factored into it if it was during the same year.
Yeah, if you don't respond to records requests, it's considered, 100% error rate, and that's not good. You should respond and use that job aid tool to know what to put in there. At the beginning of that job aid tool that I showed you, the introduction says, here, I'll pull it up. I've got it already up here on my other screen. Oops. Yeah, right here. It says at the top, hey, if you get a records request, this tool will help you. So, do that. Use this thing. This tool it tells you what to put in the records, make sure that stuff's in there, and this is how you can audit yourself. But that's what it's saying right here.
And just know that, like, when you're entering in your notes, how many patients are you seeing in an hour, in a day? Every now and then there's going to be, like, you're going to forget something's going to be left out. But have somebody double check your notes. That's why you have a team to do that. And if you've never had a third party audit your notes to give you feedback on areas of concern, you absolutely should. I was about to say, Evan and I just talked about this in a webinar, but that was for continuing education. So unless you live in Kentucky, you're not going to see that. But, a 3-chart audit will tell you what are the most common things that you're leaving out of most of your documentation.
If you really want to, you can email me, and I can, for a fee, I will do a 3-chart audit for you as an auditor that gets way beyond what you can do yourself. My goal with this webinar was to give you a tool you can use on your own. But if you really want a deeper dive and you want that, that's something I can do as a service as well. But you don't have to pay me. Just do it yourself if you want.
Okay.
But so
Doctor wants to know, is it realistic to think you can actually document sufficiently Not trying to be pessimistic, but I was going to say absolutely. I've known plenty of doctors who have gone through, had their documentation audited, and they've come out just fine.
So, yeah, I think I don't want people to leave my presentations feeling like doomsday and it's too hard to get things done. It's not that hard. We have checklists, we have the information. It takes a little bit of work and having the right tools in place, such as a great EHR system, maybe doing an internal audit on a semi-regular basis and external if you need more help. But once you get those things in place, it can be done pretty readily. And I'm confident in that. That's something I do all day long. That's why I teach in my seminars and with our software. So.
Absolutely. So yeah, don't be pessimistic. Don't feel like you can't do this right. Plenty of people do this right. And if you have a compliance program in your office, you should be self-auditing regularly. But I do have a friend who was self-auditing. He and his doctors were just checking each other's notes without any kind of consistent training on the back end. So I always recommend that every clinic, every doctor should have a 3-chart audit, either from there are plenty of consultants do this. You can use Evan, Dr. Mario does it, Mills Chang, like tons of people do this. Reach out to them if you're already using coaching. If you're already a client with a coaching group or management group, reach out to them because it's probably part of your package that they should do that. If not, you can reach out to most any presenter on the webinar series that we do to have them give you that feedback. Dr. Scott Munsterman. So the question was, how do they get like the webinar notes and the things that you talked about? Email evan.gwilliam@paydc.com. Of every one of our webinars is recorded. It'll be posted on the website tomorrow. If you registered for the webinar and you're attending it now, you'll get an email later this afternoon with a link to the recording. If I can check off 75 to 80% of the boxes, how bad or good is that, Evan?
I love that question. You got a C+, way to go. You passed. It depends on the mood of the auditor, honestly, because some auditors will be like, hey, you could improve this, but we'll let you go. And others can be like, you missed one thing. The whole thing is garbage. And I've seen it go both ways. I want you to look at it like this. If I was driving down the street, okay, and just a few blocks from my house, there's an elementary school, and I'm cruising through the school zone and the yellow lights are flashing and it says 20 miles an hour, right? I can see what the speed limit is. I know what the rules are. What I just gave you in this webinar is the speed limit. Okay, those are the things you're looking for, right? And if you went the exact speed limit, you get 100% of the boxes, right? But you might say, look, it's taking too long. I got to get where I'm going. I need to, I'm in a hurry. So maybe you go 25 miles an hour in that 20. Is there risk to you? Yes, there is. If you can check off 80% of the boxes, you have a little bit of risk, but it's pretty minor. Who's going to get pulled over at 25? I don't know. It depends on the mood of the cop who's sitting around the corner that day, or if there's nobody there watching, or if the cop just needs to meet a quota. I mean, so you have to just weigh your risk. Go 20 miles an hour if you know what it is. If you feel that's impractical, then go a little faster. But if you're going to do 50 in a 20, I think your risk is very, very high, and you're very likely to get pulled over. And so I'm trying to share with you a balance there. I also don't want you to feel like you have to go 10 miles an hour in a 20. If you go 10, you're never going to get anywhere. So where 20 miles an hour is. Go 22, maybe 25. Go 18 if you're conservative and you want to be safer. But this is a speed limit, okay? This is what they're looking for. This is the criteria. That's where your risk is. And then you decide, you balance it out and do what you can. And, there's tools out there to help you reduce risk and systematize it so it doesn't weigh you down administratively with the right tools in your office and getting the right help from consultants and whatnot.
Excellent. So I was going to tell y'all too, we have a couple hundred of these left. It's the Medicare playbook that was written by Dr. Steve Conway, who's also a healthcare attorney, and Dr. Scott Munsterman, that talks very extensively about Medicare documentation. It's an easy read. And it goes into a lot of the information that Evan talked about today. So if you click on the link I posted in the chat, we'll physically mail you one of these books for free. So we give them away at events all the time if you stop by the booth. But but we only bring a handful. So if you want one of these, just click that, fill out the information. We're not looking to spam you. I just need your address, your physical mailing address where you would like this shipped to, in that link. As a non-par provider, is there a possibility that I am not billing Medicare frequently enough and that might trigger an audit?
Is there a possibility if you're driving through a school zone and you're doing 5 miles an hour and everybody else is doing 20, could you get pulled over? Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, I guess that's possible, but who cares? You're not putting any kids at risk. You're not going to run anyone down. You're going slow. So you have very, very low risk. But I have seen people get audited, and there's reports from the OIG about people who use 9940 too often. So they're billing lesser codes, and they get highlighted because they bill it way more than everybody else, even though it's a lesser code. So yes, there's some risk, but very, very minor. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, guys. So y'all are going to get the link to the recording. You know how to request the samples and everything from Evan, but evan.gwilliam@pdc.com. And again, if you want the Medicare playbook, just click that link as well. We'll get that sent out to you also. And if you are going to be at Chiro Texpo this weekend, I'm teaching, and I'm happy to give you, we'll have a couple at the booth. Ginger will be at the Georgia Chiropractic Spring Convention with Dr. Gwilliam.
I'll be there
this weekend as well. And Heather will be at the South Carolina Chiropractic Association Annual Convention. And if you happen to be in Florida and you're at the Women in Chiropractic One Day Connect in Orlando, Elizabeth will be there. She'll also have those. So if you're at one of those 4 locations, you can pick one of these up in person. If not, fill out that form. We'll get it. Susan will mail them out tomorrow, and you'll have them by Saturday or Monday, maybe. Depends on the post office. So, but anyway, if you're in Texas, come say hey to me. If you're in Georgia, come say hey to Evan. It won't be as much fun in Georgia as it would be in Texas.
Savannah. So. We'll be in Savannah. It'll be great.
You will be, and it's going to be beautiful.
Yep.
So, okay. Well, I can't wait to see you, Dr. Lawless. It's been forever. So thank y'all so much for joining us today. We're going to wrap up 3 minutes early. Woohoo! I love it when that happens. Y'all had such good questions. So those of you who are watching the recording, you missed out on a party. Next week, we're going to be talking about the brain.
Oops. Why? No. Shoot. I think I just made you disappear, Christy.
Look at what you just did to me.
I think that was me. Sorry, I was touching buttons. Shouldn't have. You said something really important. Please repeat it.
I did. Bless it. Stop touching stuff, Evan. No.
I turned off the camera too. That was me.
Sorry. Okay. So anyway,
I'm going to
Dr.
sit on my hand.
He's our speaker next week. He does a lot of work with brain and spinal injury patients. He is a chiropractor. One of the coolest things that he does too is he does these treatments and getaways. I don't even know what to call it, but it's like a boot camp in the Keys, but they take these patients with brain injuries and chiropractic, and they also work with dolphins. Anyway, it's just fascinating. He'll be here next week. Definitely check it out because, like I said, he's one of my favorite speakers. So y'all forgive Evan for pushing buttons.
Sorry.
He just cannot help himself. Anyway, y'all have an amazing rest of your day, a fabulous week, and I will see y'all here same time, same place next week. And then we're going to take a week break off from webinars because I am going to the beach on vacay because my baby is turning 16, and then we'll come back and jump right into it. See you guys next week or this weekend in Texas. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.